Thank you, Keith. As Keith mentioned, we're going to be talking about version 11 payroll, and we're going to start off with some quick introductions.
Hi, my name is Valerie Holshin, and I'm an HCM consultant here at RPI, and I've been with RPI for about a year now, just a little over, but I've been working in the Infor Lawson space for a little over 20 years, and I'm currently involved in an v11 payroll implementation.
And my name is Jackie Dudas. I'm a principal HCM consultant with RPI. I have been here for a little over 11 years, and I've been involved with 2 payroll implementations, and GHR is kind of my sweet spot. So what we're going to talk about today is implementation considerations as you begin to think about your payroll implementation. We're also going to talk about how to make your parallel count. So some really key points and opportunities to keep in mind as you're prepping for your parallel payrolls. And then we're going to do a little bit of system exploration. We are not going to do a full demo in the system because inevitably whenever you try to do a live demo, something will freeze or crash or break and we'll have to tap dance up here to fill the time. So we're just going to do some screenshots, but don't worry, we are actually going to get into the system live and do some time record stuff and check out the payroll register. Before we get started, we do want to get a little bit of a plug out of the way here. Coming up at the end of February, beginning of March, RPI is going to host here in our Baltimore office Road Mapping Festival, where we invite you to come in with your team, and we're going to have one-on-one sessions with you and our principal consultants and team members here to kind of plan out your next 3 to 5 years and help you decide what modules you want to implement in what order. And while you're not in one of those road mapping sessions, you have an opportunity to come to hands-on training. We're going to hopefully have some payroll training, performance and goal training. There's also going to be some presentations. There's going to be a basketball pop-a-shot contest. So a lot of fun things at the end of March, beginning of February. And then next up, just next month in Tampa, Florida, we are hosting an a Cloud Suite Bootcamp, which is geared towards system administrators, tech team, IT folks, anyone who's going to be responsible for helping your system stay running. And that's in Tampa, Florida, led by some of our best tech consultants. And who doesn't want to go to Tampa in January? So, all right, now to the meat of the PowerPoint. What we want to start talking about here is our implementation considerations. So this one is pretty key, pretty important. And we're going to start with payment schedules. So payment schedules are set up to define your pay periods and your work periods. And there's also rules on there that tell you how overtime might be calculated or not. And we've seen a lot of clients who have multiple payment schedules that pay out at the same time. In GHR, your entire payroll cycle is based off of your payment schedule. So in the event that you have 2 payment schedules, like a lot of times we'll see exempt, non-exempt, you will end up running essentially 2 payrolls at the same time. You'll have 2 separate payment output files and 2 separate finance interfaces when you send the information to GL after you close payroll. So if you can, and if it's applicable, we really strongly recommend that you consolidate to 1 payment schedule. This is so that you don't have to merge those files at the end, you don't have to do duplicative work every time. And it's possible that you might still have more than 1 payment schedule if you pay out at different times or if there's any other considerations, but wherever you can, we'd strongly recommend you start thinking about that now in advance of starting that project to get everybody into 1 payment cycle.
Right, and another implementation consideration is your pay rates. So currently most organizations, or a lot of organizations, have both annual salaried pay rates and then also hourly pay rates. And a lot of times they associate those things with being exempt or non-exempt. And so in v11 payroll, one of the things that we can do is convert everyone to an hourly pay rate. And what this allows us to do is it eases some of the maintenance items that you have related to keeping your hourly rates with your hourly folks and your salaried employees with annual pay rates. And it also allows for easier reporting. And this is an area that can definitely improve not only reporting but also auditing.
Next up, we're going to talk about time record creation. So whether you're manually creating a time record or you have an inbound time record interface from your timekeeping system, one thing to keep in mind and to know here, the work assignment field, which is a system assigned sequential number, is required when you create a time record. And if you don't populate it, it will default to the primary work assignment. In this screenshot, in this case, the primary happens to be their work assignment number 1, which is not always the case. But you do want to make sure that when you're bringing in your time records, if applicable, you want to put in the actual work assignment that's relevant to that time record. Otherwise, you will get the work assignment 1 information defaulting in there. Next up, still on time records. So this one's about alternate rates. So our alternate rates on our HR 14 screen in S3, some of you may have left your alternate rates in S3 because there was no delivered interface between GHR and S3 to pass those back and forth. So you might be considering bringing your alternate rates into GHR at this point, or maybe you're just going to do the whole GHR project, including payroll, and bring it all over at the same time. Either way, I just want to point out that some of the criteria on the other pay rate screen is different in GHR than it is in S3. And namely, the position field is what you have available in GHR as opposed to the job field in S3. So you want to make sure that you take this into consideration as you're looking at your job and position structure, and you may find that you have to change that structure a little bit or add new position codes to accommodate the time record information defaulting incorrectly based on those other pay rates.
Another area to consider are consolidating your pay codes and your deduction codes. So a lot of organizations have been on their current payroll systems for many years and may have pay codes and deduction codes that they don't need anymore or that can be consolidated. And another area that is great to look at for pay codes and deduction codes is now we have up to 20 characters for the code, so they can be made much more descriptive and allows us to go away from the 101, 102 to something that means regular overtime and be more descriptive for the employees. And
not just the 20 characters in the code section, but we have 60 characters in the description section. So a lot of real estate to really kind of spread out there.
Right. And in another area to review for your deduction codes are going to be your tax provider codes. These are defaulted from BSI, but Infor and BSI have a default mapping, and we'll want to switch to this default mapping because it allows us to get the proper tax reporting when you're processing your payroll.
So real quick, just to kind of expand upon that, if you have gone live with benefits already, you might have coded in BSI codes that don't match the BSI provided code. So just might be a good opportunity to actually consolidate, or sorry, make them match the BSI codes so you don't have to continue that mapping.
Right.
And like any project, any implementation, you always want to consider the downstream effects. And here we're talking about outbound and inbound interfaces and anywhere that you might have hard-coded values. So if you do take the opportunity to update your pay codes or your deduction codes or any other pay summary groups, any other structure within the system, you want to make sure that you're also looking at any reports or interfaces where you might have hard-coded values that are filtering on a specific code. Pretty self-explanatory. We always want to do that kind of thing, but we thought it would be a mistake to not mention it.
Right, so we're going to talk about some of the cool new things that we get in the v11 payroll. The payroll cycle processing screen, I've got a series of screenshots further on in the presentation where we'll go over this, but essentially it allows us to have the look of the PR00 if you're a current S3 payroll user. And allows us to run our jobs from that screen. So again, we'll go over that a little bit further into the presentation. One of the other things I wanted to point out is some of the new reporting that's available to us in v11. The payroll register, and this is kind of a hard screenshot to see, but this is the search box for the payroll register, and this is a really powerful reporting tool. It allows you to look at the data in a lot of different ways and also allows for some of those custom reports that you have today to be able to be handled through this payroll register. There's a payroll register when you're in cycle, and then there's also another payroll register that you can use after the cycle's been closed. And the one you're seeing here is the closed cycle, and like I said, when you're in cycle, it just is reporting on payments that are in process. Another reporting area that's really been interesting to use and is really powerful is the reporting for the wage and deductions using the dimensions. So it allows you to kind of divide the data up in a lot of different ways, whether that be an annual, quarterly, monthly reporting. It also allows you to change the dimensions and allows you to report from like a top down, so it's from a company level down to the deduction level, or from the deduction level down to the company level. So if you wanted to see how a specific deduction was broken out among your different entities or your organization units, you can do that as well. So we find that this is a great tool to use, especially for your reporting.
Next up, if you're already a GHR user, you're probably pretty familiar with this, but wanted to mention the reporting is kind of inherent everywhere throughout the system. And you can see on any list view, this just happens to be the time record screen, on any list view within the system, under your three dots or your all actions menu in the top right, you have an option to export to CSV. That will go right to your print files spot, and you can open up a CSV or an Excel file right from there, and it's a really quick way to get that data in Excel in your hands really quickly to be able to slice and dice it, look at it a little bit more closely, as opposed to kind of like running a 200 series report or listing and having to wait for that to process. And then another option, right under the export to CSV, we have a create report option, and on the next slide we can see kind of what that looks like to build that report. And these are my column headers in the left-hand side, and then I can actually select the field over on the right-hand side. And this will work essentially the same. It's just a way to kind of create a custom list that you can then access from my reports in the top left near your name on the black navigation pane. So easy reporting, makes it a little bit easier to see the data in the system.
So next we want to touch a little bit on parallel planning. So one of the areas that's really critical to any payroll implementation, obviously, is our payroll parallels. That allows us to make sure that the system's doing what it needs to do with the new setup. So one of the first considerations are selecting your pay periods, and you'll definitely want to consider different deduction cycles and different parts of your quarter. So you might want to have one in the middle of your quarter and maybe one at the end of your quarter to allow you to also do testing of your regulatory reporting. And you do different things sometimes in your different deduction cycles, whether it's deduction cycle 1 or 2 or 3. So you definitely want to take that into consideration as you're selecting which pay periods you want to use for your parallels.
Yeah, and as Valerie and I were prepping for this webinar, we were talking about how oftentimes the parallel pay periods are subject to kind of these dates that we've chosen for our project. And sometimes those dates, while they might be important, like an end of a fiscal year, end of a quarter, sometimes they're arbitrary. And so we want to make sure that we are actually really focusing this whole project around our pay periods that we're choosing for our parallel, because if you don't fully test your parallel, I mean, that's the whole project right there. You want to make sure that you're paying people correctly. So we recommend that at the start of the project, where possible, you really focus your dates, including your go live, around the parallels that you've chosen.
Correct. And another area is identifying all the inputs. So there's a lot of things that go into just starting your payroll process. So if you think about your time record files, any one-time deduction files that need to be loaded, any manual updates or processes that you do that impact how your payroll calculates. So it's really important for those to be identified so that those files can be saved off and stored for when you get to the opportunity to start your parallel.
Yeah, and that's another thing that as soon as you can kind of think about that in the beginning of a project, it's a good idea too, because we've all been there in the middle of a project where you're trying to get tech development work done and you're trying to test a whole bunch of other things kind of in a silo, and then parallel sneaks up on you. And some of these things might be like muscle memory at this point. Every 2 weeks you import this file, or you might do some manual one-time deductions. And we want to make sure that each one of those items is included in each parallel. And so if we can think about this in advance and come up with a clear strategy, it'll be a lot more successful.
Correct. Another area is the timing of of the copy from your live system. So that'll dictate as far as what information gets converted into the parallel and what pieces of the payroll processing still need to be completed manually, potentially in in your parallel testing. And that's important to understand when you're going to take the copy.
Yeah, and another thing, sorry, to mention is often Infor has like a 2-week lead up time that you need to get your copy request in advance of when you actually want it to happen. So you really want to make sure you have that kind of mapped out. They'll make exceptions, I think, and copy kind of later, but you want to get that request in early so that it is appropriately timed for when your pay cycles are closing.
And as Jackie mentioned, a lot of the processing that most organizations do, it is muscle memory. You're going through your same checklist and you're doing those items, every 2 weeks or or every week. And so sometimes you kind of lose. You just want to make sure that you're preparing for the validation side of it as well. So you want to make sure that you're saving off both your PDFs and your CSVs, and those will assist in the validation process as you're moving through your parallel. It allows you to do VLOOKUPs if you have those CSV files, and a lot of times those are not things that you would normally save off in a general live payroll. So we want to make sure that you account for that as well once you've identified your parallel period. Another item that you need in order for your parallel to be successful is for you to have a successful payroll history conversion. So that's going to be a critical first step in making sure that your parallel goes smoothly.
And then last up here we have consecutive parallels. So in a perfect world, you would be able to run 2 consecutive parallel payrolls in your test system during the project. But as we all know, we find a lot of issues in our parallel payrolls. And so we recommend, if possible, it would be really great to get 2 consecutive parallels in. That way you can check out your absence accruals, your descending balance deductions, make sure that's all flowing correctly. But typically it's a little bit hard to get that to be possible with the errors you might get in the first parallel. So if you can plan that for a little bit later in your project, maybe you've ironed out some of those issues in the beginning and then you can get those consecutive parallels later. It is a really good way to get used to running multiple parallels in the new, multiple payrolls in the new system. All right, so now we're going to do a little bit of system exploration. We are going to start with some screenshots just to walk through the payroll cycle. You will get a copy of this presentation, so I know they're a little bit small screenshots, but hopefully once you get the copy of the presentation, you can zoom in a little bit better. And then we are going to go into the system and we're going to look at managing and moving time records, and then we're going to take a little bit of a look at reporting in the system as well.
So the first thing that we're going to step through is the payroll cycle screen. So this is what the screen looks like, and you can see here that at the top that you have the options that are available to you at this point in the payroll cycle. So we're running of the process for 6 employees in this case, and you can see that all of the employees that you're going to process in this payroll are listed down and below. And so I'm going to go to the next slide.
And real quick, sorry, I forgot to mention, this is our sandbox, and any of these names that you see, these are fake names. If any name matches someone you know, it's purely coincidental. So
yes.
Just a disclaimer.
Thank you for the disclaimer.
Yeah.
So the first step in our payroll process, as today you would know, is the PR 132, we are calculating the overtime. And so again, you can do this directly from this payroll cycle screen, and you can see that we have not calculated overtime yet because there's nothing in that box. After you select the calculate overtime and fill in the parameters, then you can see that the overtime is calculating. And then once it's complete, again, the payroll cycle shows that here. So again, this is similar to your PR00 screen to allow you to know where you are in your process. You'll also notice as we move through this that some of the items along the top will change, again, like I said, based on where we are in the payroll process. The next step, the next major step in the payroll process would be to lock our payroll. So this is a required step. You'll notice we don't have the option to calculate payments yet, and that's because we haven't locked our payroll. So once we lock the payroll, again, you can monitor where it is in the process. From the screen, you can see that it has a little note that it's processing, and then once it's complete, you'll see the little lock symbol next to your payment schedule. And once you get that lock schedule up there, then you can now see that calculate payments is available to us. So that's what we'll do next, is we'll calculate payments. So as part of your payroll cycle, the calculate payments comes up again. You'll have parameters to enter. I did not include those screenshots. But once it starts running, you can see again where it is in the process. One of the nice features about this payroll cycle is as you refresh, you can hover over the little information dot next to the updating, and it does give you a % complete. So it does allow you to kind of understand how far you are along in that process. And again, once it completes, now down at the bottom, we've got a complete note. And then the only step that really kind of moves off this main payroll cycle screen is the print payment step. So there's a little tab up at the top that allows you to go into this print payment tab. If you have multiple bank codes, you'll see all of them listed here. In our demo system, we only have one bank code set up currently, and it also lets you know if within that bank code you have records to process. If you do, then you can select to print the payments. And then as you can see in the bottom screenshot, if you go back to the payroll cycle tab, then you can see that that's updating. One note, and I don't have a screenshot of it because we don't have multiple bank codes, is if you have multiple bank codes that need to be completed, once the first bank code is run, it will say completed, but it will have an icon on there to tell you, hey, you haven't completed all of the bank codes yet. And so it won't say completed without that icon until you've processed all of your bank codes. Once your payments are printed and that's complete, then you've got the option now to close the payroll. So once you do that, again, this allows you to monitor while that's being run. And once that's complete, then your payroll cycle essentially clears out and it leaves you with the unposted. And it lets you know that you still need to post that payroll to the general ledger. And now that we've closed the payroll, we do have that post payroll option up at the top again. And then once you run that, you can find the interface. In the finance interface, you can see the file that gets sent to the GL.
All right, now we're gonna take a risk and dive into the actual sandbox, and we'll see how that goes.
That's right. All right, we're getting there. All right. Okay, so in here we wanted to take a quick look at how some of the time record processing works. So you can come in and we'll go into the batch processing first, so time record batches. And from here, you can see that you can have any number of batches that you want. So you can add new batches, and then as you add each batch, when you click on it, if you come down below, you can create time records. The nice feature about this is that you can add rows. So as you come in here, you can enter the basic information of the employee ID, and then a date, and the hours and the pay code, or the pay code and the rate, depending on which one you choose. And this just allows, you probably want to do regular.
Regular? Is regular in there?
Yeah.
Okay.
And this allows us to add time records very quickly in here, and allows if you don't need to override anything, I'm sorry. If you do need to override something like the work assignment, or you need to override, let's say, general ledger information, you do have to do the create in order to be able to do that. But as long as you're entering a basic time record for an employee you're using their primary work assignment, you can enter it all in from that row. So it just makes any time entry very quick and easy to do. All right. And another way that you can view these time records is to go into the time records screen, and from here you can view all different time records from different in different statuses. So the approved time records, those are going to come basically from other parts of the system. So those might be generated from benefits or from GHR. And then, of course, if you click on batch, you'll see all of the time records that are currently sitting out in the batch. And this will list all the time records in all the different batches. So it won't separate them out like it does in the other screen. You can also see time records in current cycle, and then any future time records that may exist out here. We don't have any created out here, but you can create time records in both current and future cycle directly from these screens as well. These do go to that create screen though that we saw in the batch. So this is really the time record pieces. Just one other quick thing to mention, and it's not as easy to see because we don't have a time record in current and future, but for the time records that are in current and future, you can really easily move those in between current and future status with just a right click and a move to future, or a right click and a move to current. So it's really easy to manipulate the time records out here in this screen.
Awesome. And I think we want to look at some reports too.
Yeah, I'd like to do a little bit more of a look into that payroll register and just talk a little bit about what we see there. I'm going to have you go to the reports and then to the closed payroll register. So one of the things it's hard to see is that because there's a lot of options up here in the filter, but we have the ability to really dig down into the details of the payments. So if you have multiple legal entities or organization units that you want to report by, you can definitely look at selecting just specifically those organizations. Another nice feature, if you scroll down on the searching by payment, is it gives us the ability to look for something specific. So if you're wanting to look at employees who have had a net pay value of a certain amount, you can come in here and do like less than or equal to. So somebody that you're looking for, people who may have gotten like incorrectly compensated and with a really high amount, or you're looking for something else that it allows you to come in and look at that or filter by those values. And I think these are really maybe not as helpful in the closed payroll piece, but I know for a lot of auditing pieces within the payroll cycle, you have the ability to be able to filter those checks that you're processing currently and help you identify anything that may be going on in your current payrolls. And this is essentially what comes out of that, is that it gives you a listing. And again, as Jackie mentioned, from these list views, you can take and export these to CSV. So if there's a listing that you want, or essentially a report that you want to get from this payment register, you can do that. And by exporting it to CSV and saving it off, or creating a report. And the last area that I kind of wanted to show is the dimensions. And so again, we're doing this in history. These are options that we've got during the payroll cycle as well. But if you go into deduction history, for instance, you can pick deduction or wage history. And if you go to deduction totals, then what we have here is, again, I was talking about these dimensions, and if you click on the dimensions tab there, this gives us the dimension tree. So right now, default, it comes into country, legal entity, and deduction code, but if you want to separate, if you have establishments or HR org units you want to separate it by, you can drag those over and, or maybe, the little, sorry. And we can drag those over and then essentially be able to organize those and report on them. It just gives us the ability to look at the data in a lot of different ways, in a lot of different viewpoints. So this is something that's, makes reporting easier. And and right now we just have a little limited history, so we can't see it, but.
And I think we can probably go back to maybe the cycle processing screen and just take another quick look there. Again, this is your payment schedule, and this is where you're going to be taking all of your actions to run your payroll from here. And I think that's everything we had planned to show.
I think that's it.
We planned for a lot of questions. We assume there's going to be questions, so we're ready.
Yes, hi. Sorry, getting to the beginning here. Is this where payroll starts? Are there still records brought in from Konos and batches released, PR 137?
Yes, absolutely. So, so what's currently the PR 530, so records coming in from Kronos, that still exists. We didn't show that here. It actually comes into an a time record import business class, and then those are processed. It's kind of like running your PR 530. You process those run groups, and then those all come into the batch that we showed you. So you don't have to enter them all manually, but when you load those time records, they'll come into that time record batches screen, and that's what you'll where you'll start your processing there. And you do have the equivalent of the PR 137, and there's, I don't know if you want to show it real quick up here. If you go and under time record processing, and if you go down to mass move time records, you can move them this way. And if you cancel out of here too, and you can't really see it, maybe you'll see it in the batches. So if you go to time record batches, you can click on the batch. You can see that up at the top there should be a button up there that says select or release time records. And if you release the time records from here, this is kind of equivalent of that PR 137 where you can release and
Perfect.
And then that moves them to current.
Is the runoff cycle like running a PR 140?
Run off cycle? Is that what it says?
Runoff cycle? Sorry, I'm not reading these correctly. I don't
Okay, no, that's fine.
Okay.
So the equivalent of your PR 140 today would be the calculate payments that you see in your cycle processing. So the off-cycle processing is a little different. So in the off-cycle processing, you would have, you would do your manuals, adjustments, and then you would run an off-cycle, which would actually close that off-cycle piece, and it would include your manuals and adjustments. But the equivalent of your PR 140 today would be your calculate payments in your payroll cycle.
Cool. Do we have a mapping of the old programs to what they are in the new menu-driven v11 Infor?
There is a mapping for the most part. It's not. I'm not going to say it's complete. Not everything maps one-to-one, but there is. Infor does have a mapping that.
Can you please speak to the processing times in v11 versus S3? Obviously, it varies based on client size, so percentages may be best. For instance, are you seeing payrolls take 150% longer in v11? Maybe they are the same, maybe even faster.
Wow.
Yeah, they're not faster.
That really just varies per tenant and how your tenant's set up. And so it does factor in, I believe, to just the size of your organization. So I think that's something that can be tested and tweaked to be similar to what you're seeing today. So, we're processing a lot in the current project that I'm in. We're processing a lot of payments, and we're able to do that fairly quickly based on the size of their
12,000 employees?
About 12,000 employees.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
What is the typical timeline for an S3 to v11 implementation? I assume they're referencing payroll. Do you guys want me to answer that one?
Sure.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm going to leave that one to you.
So, for a full, if it's part of a full cloud suite implementation or migration, you're looking at a year. For a standalone, depending on the size of the organization, you're probably looking at something closer to 9 months. There's a lot of variability depending on what other things are getting implemented along or not. We use title scheduling software for our S3 payrolls. Programs are scheduled and pause points are built in for validations. Is there a similar option for v11? Or would we be manually clicking each option? I don't know if I'm familiar with.
Can you say that one more time?
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that.
So they use title scheduling software for their S3 payrolls. Programs are scheduled and pause points are built in for validations.
Scheduling is going to be a WFM,
I think they're scheduling the payroll cycle.
So
they have the program schedule and they have it paused so they can validate it each step.
Yeah.
I think that's the question we're going to have to cycle back to here.
Yeah.
I think we'd have to cycle back to that one and maybe ask some of our tech folks about that.
Yeah.
For year-end updates, are they updated only during the monthly CU? If a year update is announced after December 17th, do clients need to wait until January, the third Saturday if CU is applied? That's when we're going to have to follow up with Infor. We don't know the answer to that.
Yeah.
Can you show the menu on the left to see all? Started a few minutes late, would like to see the payroll menu. Yeah, sure we can.
Yeah. So this is the payroll administrator menu. Home has this nice little dashboard that kind of shows what you have going on, what's in progress right now, if there's any errors or alerts that you might need to work through here. And we can expand this again. You have resource maintenance, deduction maintenance, time record processing. We've been through a couple times, just different ways to see the different time records and their different statuses out there. Cycle processing is where you'll probably spend a lot of time under payroll cycle. And again, we don't have one in progress here, but this is if you right click, or as Valerie showed in her screenshots, the actions across the top will change. And then we have the off-cycle processing. We visited reports to look at the closed payroll register. We can see history reports in here as well. And regulatory reporting along with setup. So this is where you build out your actual pay structure, including your pay codes, pay summary groups, deduction structure, garnishments, bank setup, etc.
And we have the super large resolution because we're broadcasting
Yes.
today.
That's
If
right.
you're using your own laptop, obviously it'd be a little bit different.
Smaller, but yep.
Does this accommodate weekly payroll? No reason it
Absolutely.
shouldn't. Yeah.
Yes.
Right, so that's how, one of the things that Jackie talked about earlier is that is all defined in your payment schedule. So if you have a weekly payroll and a biweekly and a monthly, then you would have 3 different payment schedules. So the payment schedules are more dictated instead of being exempt to non-exempt as to be, they're more aligned with how frequently you pay your employees.
Okay. Can you show the equivalent of PR 36? I'm not sure what PR 36 is.
Time record.
And that would be in the time record processing. So it would basically be the current cycle tab here. What I would consider current cycle tab. It could be the future as well, the future tab. But essentially, this is your PR 36 screen. If you do a create here, this would be your equivalent of PR 36.
And you can use Configuration Console to do an inline create, kind of like Val walked us through when we were in batch, and we did like an add row. So if you're used to seeing the PR36 and you're used to seeing kind of like a list showing up there, we can mimic that same thing. But as we mentioned before, if you do have any overrides that you want to account for, you do have to click in and do this plus sign. You do have a new tool in version 11 called Spreadsheet Designer, which works just like add-ins, a little bit better, I think. But if you do need to mass upload, you can use Spreadsheet Designer to upload to the Employee Time Record business class.
Right, and I think a lot of organizations who use add-ins extensively will find that Spreadsheet Designer works just as well, if not better, and that's a great way to load time records, especially for items, like bonuses and other things that impact a large group of employees.
How does check printing the process work? Currently we use MHC. Would that still be available? The answer is yes.
Yes, MHC, still available.
We have also leveraged IDM to print checks, so there's some options as well, at least for AP. When you see deductions current in V11, would you also be able to see history of deductions info prior to the conversion?
That would be dependent upon, if I'm understanding the question correctly, you're asking if you can see basically your deduction history. And the answer to that would be, it depends on how much payroll history you bring into the system. But if you did bring in payroll history, you would be able to see those deductions by employee, by payment, just like you would today in S3.
We sometimes run manual checks through a PR 140 cycle when we have a lot of manuals to do. Can this be accommodated in V11?
I'm not sure if I'm understanding the question correctly, but I believe
I think they're talking about like a one-off and it's multiple.
instead of
Like a
okay,
PR
so
not really
80 or
manual,
whatever.
right, so it wouldn't really be in the PR1. So you would create a manual check, and then I'm assuming they see that report in like the PR 141 today, and then I believe we can close. I feel like I'm going to answer this incorrectly here because I'm not sure I'm fully understanding, but I believe that would be part of that could be part of the processing of your payroll cycle.
Okay. So one of the things we're hoping to do with this HCM road mapping festival is to have these sandboxes up to try some of these things out, like see, what the equivalents would be and so forth. That could be fun. What if we had to add more than one manual in the manual week? Can add to payroll schedule easily.
So all of the manual processing is done in the off cycle, and so if you needed to run multiple manual cycles, you could do that.
Okay.
So you would create your manuals, and let's say you close it and then you realize you needed to run them again, you could do that. That would all just be in the off cycle processing.
Oh, this is a really good question. I don't know if we know the answer here. If we want to capture correct journal errors before the payroll is posted, where in payroll processing would that be?
You can run the payroll close in draft. It's equivalent of running it in report mode today, and you can do that. And you can do that after your gross to net calculations are completed, and you could potentially find errors at that point.
And update the...
It wouldn't update the GL until you post. So it's kind of like your PR 197 today, and then your PR 198 when you send it over. So it's like the close will put those values out there into your payroll distributions, and then when you post to the general ledger, that's when it actually goes over to GL.
Ooh. Does V11 handle apportioning the spread of a bonus over prior weeks for FLSA OT calculation?
That's a very good question. And it's not one that I've necessarily researched yet, but it is on my list because you're not the first person to ask that question. And I need to do some testing on that to see, but potentially.
Is W-2 form printing provided with V11, or would we still need to contract with MHC? My understanding is we still need to contract with MHC.
Yeah, yep.
We have a number of custom programs and sequels that run before, during, and after payroll processing S3. Can we run custom programs and sequels in V11? For example, we deal with multiple unions who have bargained to receive very specific data bi-weekly.
So is it, and I can't ask this question because I have to ask them a question, but if it's to extract certain data, we are still able to do that through flows.
Yes.
And maybe you can talk maybe more on that.
Yeah, so depending on what your custom programs are doing would dictate really our answer for how we would build that in the new system. IPA is the most powerful tool that we use with the new system in version 11, and IPA can do a lot of things for us. We don't typically see custom programs built in the same way that you might have like a ZZ program in S3 today, but that's not to say that it couldn't be necessary in the future. And we can always fall back on Configuration Console if you have custom calculations or if you need to create a custom business class to store some information that then eventually gets sucked into your payroll cycle processing. That's definitely a possibility as well, but I think we need to know a little bit more specifics about that to give the best answer.
Perfect. We currently use API for time and attendance. I'm guessing have to somehow interface with Infor Global HR. The answer is yes.
Yep.
You got to import time records for many of the time systems. Can absence process close with the payroll, or is it separate?
So yeah, we did not show that as a part of this process, but like it is today in S3, there's an absence process that runs kind of alongside the payroll process. So there is an equivalent of your LP140 that runs prior to printing your payments, and then there's also a close and a GL interface as well. And again, we didn't show that in here. That's part of our the absence management module, but does run alongside the payroll like it does today in S3.